Today I'd like to read a passage from a book that I like very much, from the pen of the person who is probably my favorite author these days, and it really has been for some time, the American author Barbara Kingsolver. If you have not read her, I hope to entice you to give her a try. I think she's really something. The book I'm going to be reading from is a collection of essays called Small Wonder. This was brought out by Perennial, which is an imprint of Harper Collins, in 2003 of a collection published in hardback the year before. Just inside the cover, I do read this. No part of this book may be used or reproduced in any manner whatsoever without written permission, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical articles and reviews. Well, I have not obtained permission, and I realize I risk another copyright infringement charge, but I really want to share this author with anyone who might not be in the habit of reading her. So, Harper Collins, please consider this a plug for this. I'm encouraging people to buy Ms. Kingsolver's books and read them. Now, the title essay, Small Wonder, is broken into 4 parts, and I'd like to read the first 2 in this video. Let's see what she has to say. On a cool October day in the oak-forested hills of Loristan province in Iran, a lost child was saved in an inconceivable way. The news of it came to me as a parable that I keep turning over in my mind, a message from some gentler universe than this one. I carry it like a treasure map while I look for the place where I'll understand its meaning. I picture it happening this way. The story begins with a wife and husband, nomads of the Lori tribe in western Iran, walking home from a morning's work in their wheat. I imagine them content, moving slowly, the husband teasing his wife as she pulls her shawl across her face, laughing, and then suddenly they're stopped cold by the sight of a slender figure hurrying toward them, the teenage girl who was left in charge of the babies. In tears, holding her gray shawl tightly around her, she runs to meet the parents coming home on the road, to tell them in frightened pieces of sentences that he's disappeared. She has already looked everywhere, but he's gone. This girl is the neighbor's daughter, who keeps an eye on all the little ones too small to walk to the field. But now she has to admit wretchedly that their boy had strong enough legs to wander off while her attention was turned to what? Another crying child, a fascinating insect. 1,000 things can turn the mind from this to that, and the world is lost in a heartbeat. They refuse to believe her at first. No parent is ever ready for this. And with fully expectant hearts, they open the door flap of their yurt and peer inside, scanning the dim red darkness of the rugs on the wall, the empty floor. They look in his usual hiding places, under a pillow, behind the box where the bowls are kept, every time expecting this game to end with a laugh. But no, he's gone. I can feel how their hearts slowly change as the sediments of this impossible loss precipitate out of ordinary air and turn their insides to stone. And then, suddenly moving to the fluttering panic of trapped birds, they become sure there is still some way out of this cage. Here my own heart takes up that tremble as I sit imagining the story. Once my own child disappeared for only minutes that grew into half an hour, then an hour, and my panic took such full possession of my will that I could not properly spell my name for the police. but I could tell them the exact details of my daughter's eyes, her hair, the clothes she was wearing, and what was in her pockets. I lost myself utterly while my mind scattered out, carrying nothing but the search image that would locate and seize my child. And that is how two parents searched in Loristan province. First, their own village, turning every box upside down, turning the neighbors out in a party of panic and reassurances. But as they began to scatter over the rocky outskirts, it grows dark, then cold, then hopeless. He is nowhere. He is somewhere unsurvivable. A bear, someone says, and everyone else says, no, not a bear. Don't even say that. Are you mad? His mother might hear you. And some people sleep that night, but not the mother and father, the smallest boys, or the neighbor's daughter who lost him, and early before the next light they are out again. Someone is sent to the next village, and larger parties are organized to comb the stony hills. They venture closer to the caves and oak woods of the mountainside. Another nightfall, another day, and some begin to give up. But not the father or mother, because there is nowhere to go but this, as we all have done this. We bang and bang on the door of hope, and don't anyone dare suggest there's nobody home. The mother weeps, and the father's mouth becomes a thin line as he finds several men willing to go all the way up into the mountains, into the caves, 5 kilometers away. In the name of heaven, the baby is only 16 months old, the mother tells them. He can't have walked that far. Everybody knows this, but still they go. Their feet scrape the rocky soil. Nobody speaks. Then the path becomes softer under the live oaks. The corky bark of the trees seems kinder than the stones, an omen. These branches seem to hold promise. Lorry people used to make bread from the acorns of these oaks. Their animals feed on the acorns. These trees sustain every life in these mountains. The wild pigs, the bears. Still nobody speaks. At the mouth of the next cave they enter, the 4th or the 100th. Nobody will know this detail, because forever after it will be the first and last. They hear a voice. Definitely it's a cry, a child. Cautiously they look into the darkness, and ominously they smell bear. But the boy is in there, crying, alive. They move into the half-light inside the cave, stand still, and wait while the smell gets danker and the texture of the stone walls weaves its details more clearly into their vision. Then they see the animal. Not a dark hollow in the cave wall as they first thought, but the dark, round shape of a thick-furred, quiescent she-bear lying against the wall. And then they see the child. The bear is curled around him, protecting him from these fierce-smelling intruders in her cave. I don't know what happened next. I hope they didn't kill the bear, but instead simply reached for the child, quietly took him up, praised Allah and this strange mother who had worked his will, and swiftly left the cave. I've searched for that part of the story, whether they killed the bear. I've gone back through news sources from river to tributary to rivulet until I can go no further because I don't read Arabic or Farsi. This is not a mistake or a hoax. This happened. The baby was found with the bear in her den. He was alive, unscarred, and perfectly well after 3 days, and well fed, smelling of milk. The bear was nursing the child. What does it mean? How is it possible that a huge, hungry bear would take a pitifully small, delicate human child to her breast rather than rip him into food? But she was a mammal, a mother. She was lactating, so she must have had young of her own somewhere. possibly killed or dead of disease, so that she was driven by the pure chemistry of maternity to take this small, warm neonate to her belly and hold him there gently. You could read this story and declare impossible, even though many witnesses have sworn it's true. Or you could read this story and think of how warm lives are drawn to one another in cold places. Think of the unconquerable force of a mother's love, the fact of the DNA code that we share in its great majority with other mammals. And you could think of all that and say, of course the bear nursed the baby. He was crying from hunger. She had milk. Small wonder. The story of the child and the bear came to me on the same day I read the year's opening words on the bombing campaign in Afghanistan. I sat very still at the table that morning while my coffee went cold and my eyes scanned one sentence after another, trying to absorb the account of explosives raining from the sky on a place already ruled by terror, by all accounts as poor and war-scarred a populace as has ever crept to a doorway and looked out. My heart was already burdened by grief. Only days had passed since I sat in this same place at the same time of day and listened to a report that unfolded unbelievably, numbingly, into a litany of unimaginable terror and assault on this country that holds my love and life. I could hardly bear more. But now my mind's eye ran away to find women on the other side of the world who were looking just then from their children up to the harrowing skies. What would they make of this message, whose retaliatory import seemed so perfectly clear to us? I read that the bombs had taken, among others, 4 humanitarian aid workers in the small office in Kabul that coordinated the work of removing landmines from the soil of that beleaguered nation. My heart's edge felt as dull and pocked as an old shovel as it scooped low to take on this new weight, the rubble and grief of war. And so, when I came to the opposite page in the Book of Miracles, I cleaved hard to this other story. People not altogether far away from Kabul, wrapping themselves in similar soft robes, similar hopes, had been visited by an impossible act of grace. In a world where wells of kindness seem everywhere to be running dry, a bear nursed a lost child. The miracle of Loristan is genuine. If you venture onto the information highway with a good search engine and propose Kaihan, Iran, bear, you will find this tiny, remarkable note in the human archive. You will also find, as I did, a report written by Heshmatollah Tabarzadeh, telling how he and 11 other Iranian students heading home after a rally were arrested and tortured for protesting against government oppression. His story comes up in the search because it was reported in Kaihan, and buried deep in the text are the words of an officer who told him during one of his strenuous torture sessions, "We can milk roosters here. Bears lay eggs here. You're just a human being. In the course of 1 hour, we can make a bear confess to being a rabbit." Another small footnote in the human archive. God is frightful. God is great. You pick. I choose this. God is in the details, the completely unnecessary miracles sometimes tossed up as stars to guide us. They are the promise of good fortune in a cloudless day, and the animals in clouds. Look hard enough and you'll see them. Don't ask if they're real. I elect to believe that the Lori men didn't kill the bear. For some years to come, I will picture the father quietly lifting the boy from her belly, wrapping him in the soft cloth of his shirt, and reverently leaving the cave of his salvation. leaving a small leaving a small pile of acorns outside the lair of this mother, this instrument of Allah's design, as a sacrament. I believe in parables. I navigate life using stories where I find them, and I hold tight to the ones that tell me new kinds of truth. This story of a bear who nursed a child is one to believe in. I believe that the things we dread most can sometimes save us. I am losing faith in such a simple thing as despising an enemy with unequivocal righteousness. A mirror held up to every moral superiority will show its precise mirror image. The terrorist loves his truth as hard as I love mine. He has a mother who looks on her child with the same fierce pride I feel when I look at my own. Someone, somewhere, must wonder how I could love the boys who dropped the bombs that killed the humanitarian aid workers in Kabul. We are all beasts in this kingdom. We have killed and been killed, and some new time has come to us in which we are called out to find another way to divide the world. Good and evil cannot be all there is. Lately, we've had to consider a new kind of enemy we can hardly bear to behold. A foul hatred bent to the destruction of all things precious to us, to me. I'll shudder here and speak for myself as someone who loves her life as it is, a woman whose spirit would surely get itself stoned to death if forced to submit to the order of such men. The horrors they've wrought have reduced me at times to a pure grief in which I could only cross my arms against my chest and cry out loud. I can't pretend to understand their aims. I can barely grasp the motives of a person who hits a child, so I certainly have no access to the minds of men who could slaughter thousands of innocents and die in the process, or train others to do those things. I presume they want us to become more like themselves, hateful, self-righteous, violent. I expect they would count themselves victorious to see us reduced to panic under their specter, to fall into factions of difference and censor or attack our own minorities, to weaken and let go of the ideals of equality and kindness that first brought our country onto the map of the world. So I hold my own heart fast against the fulfillment of this horrific prophecy, and I hope that the men who constructed it can be made to live out humiliated ends in prison, a punishment that would inspire fewer followers, I think, than dramatic death in battle. But even that would not be the end of the story. This new enemy is not a person or a place. It isn't a country. It is a pure and fearsome ire, as widespread as some raw element like fire. I can't sensibly declare war on fire, or reasonably pretend that it lives in a secret hideout like some comic book villain, irrationally waiting while my superhero locates it and then drags it out to the thrill of my applause. We try desperately to personify our enemy in this way, and who can blame us? It's all we know how to do. Declaring war on a fragile human body and then driving the breath from it, that is how enmity has been dispatched for all of time, since God was a child and man was even more of one. But now we are faced with something new, an enemy we can't kill, because it's a widespread anger so much stronger than physical want that its foot soldiers gladly surrender their lives in its service. We who live in this moment are not its cause. Instead, 1,000 historic hungers blended to create it. But we are its chosen target. We threaten this hatred, and it grows. We smash the human vessels that contain it, and it doubles in volume like a magical liquid poison and pours itself into many more waiting vessels. We kill its leaders and they swell to the size of martyrs and heroes, inspiring more martyrs and heroes. This terror now requires of us something that most of us haven't considered: how to defuse a lethal enemy through some tactic more effective than simply going at it with the biggest stick at hand. Something new is upon us, and yet nothing is ever new. 2,000 years ago, the Greeks understood this enemy. It inhabited their imagination in a favorite tale of heroic adversity, the story of Jason and the Argonauts, where it took the shape of a particular dragon. When this creature was slain and its corpse fell to the soil, each of its teeth germinated and instantly grew into a new enemy, fully armed and borne full force to the battle. In all of his picturesque predicaments, Jason never faced one more impossible than this field of foe, each with its own mouthful of teeth. I better try that sentence again. In all of his picturesque predicaments, Jason never faced one more impossible than this field of foes, each with its own mouthful of teeth aching to germinate. For once he couldn't fight his way out. It took a woman to save him. Medea, who loved Jason and tried to protect him, whispered in his ear a simple truth: hatred dies only when turned on itself. This force could not be extinguished by the sword, she told him. Only a clever psychological strategy could vanquish it. Jason took her advice, but went about it in his own way, by throwing a rock cryptically and inciting an internal riot of rock throwing in which the dragon-toothed warriors destroyed one another. Later on, Jason encountered another dragon. Unbelievably, but of course heroes being only what they are, predictably, he once again drew his sword ready to kill it. Medea stopped him with a quick, gentle hand on his bicep. This time, rather than allowing a new field of hatred to be sown and reaped, she moved quietly to the mouth of the sleeping dragon and gave it an elixir of contentment, so that it would remain asleep as she and her lover passed by. At a time when the modern imagination seems fully engaged in discussion of swords of every length and breadth, there's little room for other kinds of talk. But I am emboldened by Medea to speak up on behalf of psychological strategy. It's not a simple-minded suggestion. Her elixir of contentment is exactly as symbolic as Jason's all-conquering sword, and the latter has by no means translated well into reality. The strategic difference is the capacity to understand this one thing: some forms of enemy are made more deadly by killing. It would require the deepest possible shift of our hearts to live in this world of fundamental animosity and devote ourselves not to the escalating exertion to kill, but rather to lulling animosity to sleep. Modern humanity may not be up to the challenge. Modern humanity may not have a choice. The miracle of Loristan province haunts me as I consider this predicament. I catch glimpses of that bear pacing relentlessly on the periphery of everything I thought I could be sure of. We are alive in a fearsome time, and we have been given new things to fear. We've been delivered huge blows, but also huge opportunities to reinforce or reinvent our will, depending on where we look for honor and how we name our enemies. The easiest thing is to think of returning the blows. But there are other things we must think about as well, other dangers we face. A careless way of sauntering across the earth and breaking open its treasures, a terrible dependency on sucking out the world's best juices for ourselves, these may also be our enemies. The changes we dread most may contain our salvation, and the stinging truth that we aren't entirely loved for our ways in this world. Like the bear, this thing could eat us up or save us. We will see. There are many angles on the miracle in Loristan. For one, that a bear was in the cave at all. Bears are scarce in the world now. Relative to their numbers in times of old, they're a rare sight, even in the wildest mountains of Iran. They have been hunted out and nearly erased from the mountains and forests of Europe, much of North America, and other places that have been inhabited for thousands of years by humans who, by and large, find it difficult to leave large predators alive. Bears and wolves are our fairy tale arch enemies, and in these tales we teach our children only and always to kill them, rather than to tiptoe past and let them sleep. Maybe that's why I'm comforted by the image of a small child curled in the embrace of a mother bear. We need new bear and wolf tales for our times, since so many of our old ones seem to be doing us no good. Now we're finding that it takes our every effort of will and imagination to pull back, to stop in our tracks as hunter and hunted, to halt our habit of killing before every kind of life we know arrives at the brink of extinction. Some days you have to work hard to save the bear. Some days the bear will save you. I may continue with the other two parts of this lead essay in Barbara Kingsolver's Small Wonder. Meanwhile, I'll offer only that I think there may be something very valuable in these insights for us in the time that we find ourselves occupying, a decade and a half after these stories were first published. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.